We had a good thought about this last week that this is what it would come to when Representative David Valadao took an early lead in the vote counts on Tuesday of last week, in a large percentage of those votes coming from Kern County. It's the county that, if Rudy Salas was going to pull this off, he had to win it. And still into last night, David Valadao had the lead and, of course, was winning those northern, more conservative parts of his district that are in Tulare and Kings County. Uh, Tim, I'll go to you first on this. I mean, what do you make of this performance from Representative Valadao? It could end up being one of his more lopsided wins in this district for the last few years.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think certainly a good performance by Congressman Valadao, and that goes to a good campaign, and I think that he has a history and track record of running very good campaigns and also running and representing his district well. So from that standpoint, not at all surprised. I think that most people were expecting it to be a little bit closer than what it is at this point, but certainly with I think overall Republican performance nationwide, as well as you combine that with a representative who really fits his district, that goes to the results that we're seeing right now.
And Blake, he told us back in August, he says, I just live with the reality that it's always going to be within 5 percentage points. He's up 7 percentage points now. It could still technically come down a bit, but what do you make of that, the Republicans' performance across the Central Valley at this moment?
Yeah, well, I think it's certainly always going to be a very close race in this district, no matter what the election year is. But I think it's trending. We see that spread really trending with the rest of the country right now. I think you see a lot of these districts that are tending to, in a lot of counties across the country that are tending to shift slightly to the right. I think we see that reflected in the results here. But I also think it should be mentioned that, Congressman Valadao does have that track record of getting those votes, those crossover votes from Democrats, which is very needed in this district. And so, it's a 46% Democrat seat, 26%, I believe, are Republicans, and then 23 no party preference. So it's really critical for him to get those crossover votes, and I think he demonstrated that in this election.
It's a very heavily Democratic registered district, as you just pointed out, Blake. But at the same respect, it's a very low turnout district too. So the people that are very passionate about turning out are definitely making their voices heard, and it's by a slim margin in the grand scheme of things. But when you look at just, I mean, what it could end up being anywhere from 7,000 to 10,000 vote margin, that's pretty significant given the course of the last few elections that we've seen. Tim, what do you make of this somewhat shift as well towards Republicans in the Central Valley and across the country?
Well, certainly we've seen in this particular part of the Central Valley and in California, voters for many cycles go with the kind of individual candidate, go with the issue rather than the party. And we've got history of this going back really decades in the Central Valley, and used to be called the Valleycrat, right? A Central Valley Democrat who would vote for Republicans or vote a little bit more conservative on issues. And we've also seen it the other way, where you have Republicans who have voted for a conservative or more moderate Democrat that represents their interests. Maybe is a little bit more agricultural oriented, those types of things in the Central Valley. That's been something that historically has taken place. And I think here, we have kind of that perfect district where you have the registration, which certainly heavily on paper favors Democrats, but you have voters here who have a demonstrated history of voting for the person or voting for the issue that tends to be a little bit more center right leaning, regardless of the party that they represent.
It wouldn't be fair to throw Rudy Salas' name not in this boat as well, but particularly in terms of the ads that we saw as it relates to David Valadao, it seems like his views on immigration right now are very much in line with not only the county, but of course the country, which is pathways to citizenship, but also hardline at the border. But his campaign really hit on those notes. It seemed the most in this district, as opposed when you compare those two campaigns together, and of course in the primary to make himself a little bit different from the more conservative option and Chris Mathis as well. Blake, is that was that a strong and a good idea to kind of go on this campaign of let me be in tune with where the country is, or let me just see what works best on this particular issue?
Yeah, it's certainly a fine line to walk. I mean, in this district and in the whole valley, I mean, immigration is a huge issue, especially because, the agricultural labor force really relies on that, immigration coming across into California. But I think that you see a lot of this big national push and this big national trend of folks wanting some semblance of reform, some sort of solution on the table. And so I think being able to put that forth and say that there is a solution and a path forward is something I think that you see candidates across the board. You saw both Democrats and Republicans sort of messaging on this immigration issue, regardless of the track record of either party. So I think, yeah, it was certainly smart to be able to message on that issue.
And as far as spending and messaging is concerned, this will be my last question for this, Tim. Democrats once again spend a lot of money in this area, in this district, both for the Salas campaign itself and then both from the DCCC. Is
Yeah.
it worth it spending this much money in this district, or is it going to be a full review of, okay, this is how we have to do it? Because clearly, the last two times, as far as Rudy Salas is concerned, it didn't quite work out too well.
Well, you have to ask yourself, how much is the House majority worth to either Republicans or Democrats? And that's kind of the operative question to ask in terms of spending. I think in this district, certainly I would not anticipate that you're going to see any less spending in the future. And certainly they're going to try to recruit strong candidates each and every time to run against David Valadao. That's just kind of the nature of this district. But you do have the unique situation where David Valadao is a Republican representing a heavily Democratic district, but really does fit the district and the voters that he represents, and is able to communicate that and articulate that in a way that the voters respond to. And so it's one of those unique situations that you don't necessarily have all the time, but in this case, I think really does go more towards the person and the representative that David Valadao is versus any particular political party.
And then now turning to what his win means for the House, we've also heard reports from multiple outlets. They've already projected this. Republicans are taking back the House of Representatives. What does that mean for the Central Valley and for legislation and things that are very important for them? And then maybe the most significant thing is not only the House majority itself, but also winning a Senate majority too. Blake, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it certainly matters. I think there's certainly an impact, and you can see, Central Valley with, big federal issues with, issues with the federal nexus like water, like, immigration and agriculture. It certainly matters when there are those connections and there's that alignment politically, whether, Democrat or Republican, and that you can align with folks in the administration to be able to push policies that work for the Central Valley. So I think you're going to see that alignment occur, with some of these recent election wins in the Central Valley, with the Senate also being aligned, with the same representation as the House, with the Republicans taking the majority there, and with the administration. I think you'll see some coordination in terms of trying to push legislation for things like water, solutions focused on agriculture, and maybe even not necessarily legislation, but some administrative fixes and regulations that impact the region as well.
Yeah, and Tim, your thoughts on that too with the Senate?
Yeah, I agree with everything that was said. I do think what's going to be interesting is, for the first time in a long time, you have two United States senators from California, Adam Schiff and Alex Padilla, who are both Los Angeles, have Los Angeles ties, and very little experience or tie to the Central Valley, and particularly issues like agriculture and water. You have, or at least agriculture and water from the Central Valley or Northern California perspective. I think this is where, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you're going to miss the influence of Dianne Feinstein, who had a great deal of experience and had asserted herself on issues like water and agriculture and those types of things, and even going back to Barbara Boxer as well, who had a little bit more of a history and track record on some of those issues. But certainly with Dianne Feinstein, now you have two senators from California, again, regardless of party, who just don't have that relationship or experience with the Central Valley. And so it's going to be incumbent upon Central Valley Democrats that may be poised to win here, like Jim Costa or Josh Harder or some of these others, and even the Republicans, Vince Fong, David Valadao, John Duarte, to be able to articulate that to their Senate colleagues and be able to make sure that the Central Valley is represented, particularly on those issues like water and ag.
And to note, I mean, some of those House races seem to be in the favor of those candidates. Haven't been called yet, but you have to imagine with how surprisingly close the Costa and harder ones have been, and even if Duarte holds on too, and or should Gray flip, it seems like the pressure's on to always win these seats now because they seem like they can go either way now going forward, depending on what the mood of the country is and who's in power.
100%.
And
Yeah,
and on
absolutely.
Yeah, and on that topic too, I mean, I want to cycle back here to Kern County and maybe the energy in this interesting thing with the United Front of California Republicans, it seems, against what the Newsom administration has been doing in California. We've talked a number of times about seemingly, as folks here would put it, an oil crusade against the Central Valley and particularly in Vince Fong's district, but something that draws concerns for a number of Californians that are just trying to get cheaper prices at the pump. Newsom has talked about trying to Trump-proof California, but what can these representatives do to try, I guess, and Newsom-proof Washington, D.C. and try to repel him in Washington? Tim, to you.
Well, I think obviously Gavin Newsom is really using this as a political posturing tool to elevate his profile, once again nationally, and for whatever future endeavors he has in mind. I think the one thing that we have to be super careful of here in California, obviously, is making sure that our energy resources and also the cost of living is protected. And if Gavin Newsom wants to continue on that crusade, and it's still just like we're seeing, at the pumps, again, another price increase on gas, gasoline, you're gonna continue to see this revolt from voters, from both parties, because there just is a limit to how much cost of living increases and spending and all of that type of thing that they can actually take.
Yeah, Blake, same thing to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with everything that Tim had to say. I think, Newsom is certainly admire. I think his aspirations are set, and I think folks have known that for quite a while, and where he would like to head nationally. I think there's a lot of speculation there. As we speak, he's actually in Washington, D.C. right now, meeting with Democrats in the California delegation and others, top leaders in Washington, D.C. So I think that he's certainly trying to position himself accordingly in sort of that contrast with the Trump administration. And so I think we're going to continue to see that throughout the next 4 years, and also especially during the midterms as well.
I would just throw that question in as we go to our last few questions here. I mean, he has to have some sort of secret smile that he's not putting on to the public as it goes to the results of this last election, right? Because he would have been someone that, should he have had those presidential aspirations, would have had to wait until 2032 at the earliest, potentially, to run for president. And now all of a sudden, 2028, just 2 years after he finishes his term, he's been very media savvy and getting his name out there nationally. He took all those, whether or not Californians like it, he took all those tours to those southern states, and he's gotten his profile up. Is he really positioning himself at this point for these future aspirations, at least getting himself laying down the groundwork for potentially a run in a few years?
Well, I think he's licking his wounds from this past election because he wanted to be the guy who was facing off against Donald Trump and was the Democratic nominee instead of Kamala Harris. Not only that, but then also getting in on the no side on Prop 36 and that going down pretty handily here in California. So I think I think that Governor Newsom is kind of taking as he does, kind of take a look at the political landscape as it sits today and what the next opportunity is for him. But certainly he wanted 2024, I think, as the opportunity for him running for president, and Vice President Harris's run just kind of delayed things a bit.
Yeah, Blake, you agree?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think, had there been a little bit more time for, an open primary, and even former Speaker Pelosi had suggested this a little bit the other day, I think, you may have seen Governor Newsom enter that race, and you may have seen a few more other contenders emerge as well. But I just don't think that there was enough time to allow for that process. And so the Democrats really had to make a decision to rally behind Vice President Kamala Harris. And I think that's really where you saw Governor Newsom sort of lose his shot this presidential cycle. So I think he's certainly considering it. And just like Tim said, looking at the landscape ahead in 2028.
And that last question I have is focused on the governor's race in 2026 because, and really just balance of power in California too, because Tim, you mentioned it earlier, but just the locale of Alex Padilla and Adam Schiff to Southern California. Gavin Newsom's a Bay Area guy. And when we look at a few of these big candidates that are out there, everyone who's not necessarily attached to Newsom in some way, like it seems like everybody in his cabinet's deciding to make a run for this thing. But the other people that aren't are Antonio Villaraigosa, former LA mayor, Katie Porter may make a run as well, another SoCal area person. What would it mean to have someone who's from Southern California in Sacramento, as opposed to what the current standard is, which is what we were seeing from the Bay Area and the Bay Area political machine that currently operates the state? What does that difference look like for folks in the Central Valley who are kind of wedged in between?
Well, I think it depends, right? It depends who it is. If you have somebody like Katie Porter, who is very clearly much further to the left on a number of issues, versus somebody like an Antonio Villaraigosa, who former Speaker of the California State Assembly, but has some history and has done some work in the Central Valley and kind of understands things from at least an issues perspective. So even though they're both really from the greater Los Angeles area, two different perspectives in terms of their relationship or at least understanding of the Central Valley and issues like agriculture and water and that type of thing. So really it all depends, and so much of the Central Valley kind of core issues really do go beyond partisanship, and we've seen that over decades, and particularly as it relates to agriculture, water, energy, some of those types of things, where we had different representatives from both parties really go to bat on different things, regionally, for the Central Valley. And Central Valley legislators, whether it's in Sacramento or Washington, D.C., really stick together when it comes to representing Central Valley interests. So, it will be interesting, and it'd be fun to see in the governor's race, someone pop up, from the Central Valley that decides to throw their hat in the ring.
Is that a hint? Who is it?
Oh, I have no
Me neither.
I have no idea. I was gonna start the Will Silverstein for Governor 2026 blog, but
Hey, look, that's the soft launch for that's a few years down the road. I don't know if I'm quite that. I need to have some gray hair, but I do have hair gel, so hey, look,
there you go. There you go.
For what's next. Blake, to you, I think that's a great point that Tim made about voters not voting on partisan, or excuse me, voting on nonpartisan issues, like the cost of all the things that it costs them to operate their daily lives in the Central Valley. Are they people that may be more adverse to going to someone that's very close to Newsom right now? Are they looking away as it goes to 2026? And I know we're predicting a few years down the line, but it seems like he's cast definitely a web of difficult results where he's licking his wounds. I think the other thing to mention too was what happened with Prop 1, how that barely got over the finish line earlier this year. I know it's something that happened a little while back, but something else too that wasn't particularly popular among Central Valley Democrats.
Yeah, you may see a shift of some folks who want to sort of distance themselves from the current administration and present a new pathway forward. I think it's unlikely that we'll see a gubernatorial a successful governor who is not a Democrat. I think most likely we'll see the successful candidate be a Democrat in California, just based on the mathematical numbers and the party registration throughout the state. But I do think sort of to the points expressed earlier, that you'll see a regional fight behind the scenes between someone who's more Southern California based, someone who's more Northern California or Bay Area based. And I think that it's possible that candidate may have to sort of build a broader coalition, even though the population in the Valley still doesn't quite amount to those other regions. They're going to need those votes. And so you'll see those candidates campaigning here, in the coming months and up until the 2026 election. to try to build that broader coalition regionally and include the San Joaquin Valley.
And I know the Maddie Institute and, of course, here at Eyewitness News will probably be happy to host as many people as we can, get them through like we were doing with the Senate and House races these last couple of years, too. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. Appreciate it as always. Thank you, Blake. Thank you, Tim, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you both.